Welcome to another episode of Forbidden Films Podcast.
This is a podcast about the movies they won't make anymore. I'm Barry Germansky, a film producer.
And I'm Wayne Kramer, a writer and director. It's showtime, folks. Today we are revisiting Bob Fosse's prophetic semi-autobiographical masterpiece, All That Jazz, released in 1979, which I consider a perfect film in every way, and one that sits in my top 10 list of my favorite films ever. I think my top 10 is closer to a top 15 and could easily reach 20 or 50 titles. But All That Jazz has steadily climbed the ranks over the years and is fully inducted at this point. I should mention that I'm not usually the biggest fan of musicals, and at times I actually forget that All That Jazz is a genuine musical, although it uses the songs to enhance the narrative and not actually serve as the narrative. That is until the end, when the songs do take over the narrative. It's a visionary, expressionistic, phantasmagoria, inward-looking film. It's also a very meta film, with Fosse commenting on his actual life while using some of the real actors and dancers that he's had relationships with in the film itself. Most importantly, it's a film that has soul. It has a beating human pulse, and all the characters are flawed, yet relatable, especially Joe Gideon, played by the brilliant Roy Scheider, even when we don't approve of his behavior. All That Jazz touches the human in me, and actually, for all its cynicism, gives me faith in humanity, that humans are capable of making such incredible, challenging, sublime art when we're pounded over the head every day with the worst of humanity, war and hatred and ignorance and self-dealing. All That Jazz is like taking an enema for all that bullshit and being reminded of how much our art can actually bring out the best in us. So, needless to say, I love this film. I saw it in South Africa when it was first released, and it was censored quite heavily, especially in the air erotica sequence, but I still loved it nevertheless. And it gets better with every viewing. I mean, the movie just overwhelms me with how brilliant it is.
Well, I love it too, and it's either my favorite Bob Fosse film or my second favorite. It's between Cabaret and All That Jazz. I can't really decide. But yeah, I also prefer it to 8.5. I think it's better than 8.5, even though it's obviously inspired by 8.5. I think it has a better story. It has better performances. The music is consistently interesting throughout, and it's self-indulgent, but it's not too pretentious because it's always making fun of itself.
Yeah, I love 8.5 as well, but I find this to be the more enjoyable film. I think it gets under the skin more. It feels more honest. And as surreal as it gets, it's still more grounded to me.
Oh, and it flows better. That's the other thing. It from beginning to end, All That Jazz has no narrative hiccups.
Well, what's stunning about All That Jazz is how technically proficient it is.
It is.
And I envy whatever Bob Fosse's shooting schedule was on that film because it is so immaculately covered.
Yes.
There's not an angle and not a camera move that it seems he denied himself or the financiers did. It's shocking to me how a major studio got behind such a risky film. And clearly Bob Fosse was a hugely esteemed director, Oscar-winning director for Cabaret. But this film would never be made today, let alone some of the subject matter that we'll discuss. But it would never be made today because it wouldn't be deemed commercial enough or worthy enough of a movie theater, which seems restricted to just films that deal in superficial spectacle.
And it's semi-abstract. But what's fascinating is the movie is palatable to a mass audience at the same time. Most movies that would attempt to do what this movie's attempting to do, and I think it succeeds, would not create a commercially satisfying or crowd-pleasing experience. And I think this movie is a crowd pleaser, or at least it was when it came out. Today, because some people could consider it misogynistic, maybe it wouldn't be a crowd pleaser, but I have no issue with the film's thematic content or anything that it deals with. I think it's important to show flawed human beings in art. The movie's not endorsing bad behavior. It's just being honest about human behavior. So,
well, you know, when All That Jazz came out, I don't think it was a crowd pleaser. I think critics gravitated towards it, but I don't think it was a huge hit financially at the box office. It got quite a few nominations and ended up winning 4 Oscars, which were for all the technical contributions, even though Fosse and his co-writer were nominated and Roy Scheider was nominated. They did not win the big awards. But I think over the years, this movie has gained enormous stature and respect.
Well, so
And
now it
obviously,
seems like it's a crowd pleaser, whether it is or isn't. Obviously, nothing's actually for everyone.
yeah, it's hard to call all that jazz a crowd pleaser, but I tell you something, the musical sequences, the dances are
Yeah.
so incredible and so dynamic. And Anne Reinking, oh my God,
Well,
she just,
what I mean also is it's not going out of its way to be, let's say, confounding. In other words, it would be possible for an average film goer, whether they end up liking the movie or not, personally, to follow the movie from beginning to end. So theoretically, at least, it has the makings of a crowd-pleasing spectacle.
well, it may be very abstract and surreal in places, but in a very logical way, in a
That's
way the
right. So the
audience
balance that
can.
is struck is extraordinary. I think that's one of the film's greatest achievements, that it is both abstract and tangible in equal measure.
I
And
mean,
you
we
and
understand the challenges that Joe Gideon is facing
yeah,
with choreographing this new show, which was inspired by his time choreographing Chicago in 1974, and also the clashes he had with Stephen Schwartz when he was doing Pippin and taking what Schwartz perceived to be very innocent, guileless material, and Fosse was sexing it up. And you see that in the erotica sequences. But it's an artist fighting the system, fighting his own high expectations of himself, fighting his own personal demons. And we can all identify with that kind of character. But it's also interesting why they won't make a movie like this ever again. Because the lead character, Joe Gideon, is obviously based on Fosse himself, is presented as a deeply flawed man, and as I'll describe, with huge appetites for women and drugs. And while harboring a deep appreciation for women, also kind of treats them like garbage, like disposable amusements. But when he comes into their lives, or they come into his life, he's clearly wearing a huge sign around his neck that shouts damaged goods, narcissist, self destructive, incapable of commitment, proceed with caution. I feel Joe never lies about who he is. He makes no promises other than he'll disappoint any woman looking for commitment or monogamy. But the trade off is artistic growth and being exposed to a genius at work. And it's interesting, I saw an interview with Anne Reinking where when she read the script, and she was involved with Bob Fosse at that time. She was actually the character she plays in the movie. And she said to him, why did you write yourself to be such an asshole? Because I know you're not. I happen to think you're a nice guy. And a lot of people think you're a nice guy. You're exacting, but you're a good person. And he said, if I wrote Joe Gideon to be a nicer person, the audience would miss the lesson. And the lesson that he was referring to was the narcissism of Joe Gideon, probably Fosse himself. And he feels it's the narcissism that kills the character in the end. The way he pushes himself and thinks this reputation he has, and he's got to live up to being this phenomenal choreographer and pushing himself with the drugs and the alcohol and thinking on some level he's owed these women. Fosse was already calculating all of that into the film and obviously even predicting his death. And when you see still pictures of Fosse from around the time of all that jazz, he is Roy Scheider. He has the cigarette
yeah.
sticking out of his mouth. I mean, there's behind the scenes footage of him directing the on Broadway sequence, the cattle call sequence on the Criterion disc. And he is doing exactly what Scheider is doing. He's got he never does not have a cigarette in his mouth. And he knew he was fucking up his health. But like I said, he flirted with death, which is what you see in the movie with the Jessica Lange character as the angel of death. I love those sequences because it shows that Fosse is so self-aware of what he's doing to himself and how he's destroying his health, not only just through bad habits, but through stress. And I feel like the Jessica Lange character, Angelique, angel of death, so to speak, is trying to talk him out of coming into her embrace. And he doesn't seem to be buying those arguments. He seems to think it's inevitable that you'll be coming for me very soon. He presents her with, when we first see Angelique, she's got these veils on. She's fully veiled. But there's one point in the movie where she takes the veil off. And I think that's when it's the end for Joe Gideon. He doesn't die right then and there. But I feel that's where she goes, I can't get him to change his behavior, to moderate himself. So I am going to be taking him into my warm embrace fairly soon. And there's so much great, it's not even subtle symbolism, but it's so artistic. So there's so much to this film. And for a film also about a man who takes these female relationships for granted in his life, the female characters in the film are all superbly defined.
They are.
And they know what they're getting into with Gideon. I mean, they don't want to be treated this way, but they can't help but loving him and admiring him.
Yeah,
And
and it's a
yeah,
very complex series of relationships that he has. Now, when you say, and I agree with you that this movie would have a hard time getting made today because of how it depicts his relationship with various women.
and I just want to clarify,
Yeah,
not just in the sense that he has sex with these women in a very disposable way, but also because he's hitting on these women that he hires. They're working under him. And that certainly isn't going to go over well in today's climate.
oh, look how he treats the nurse.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that. He's super handsy with the nurse, which seems like a movie cliche in of itself. But with, let's say, the character of Victoria, right from the opening of the film, he's got his eye on her.
Yes,
And I love that scene where she comes over to his apartment the first time. I
yes.
love the way Fosse stages it. He's got is it Harry Nilsson's song, I think,
Yeah,
playing.
it's very well used.
It's such a great song. And Joe walks over to the doorway and he's got the wine glasses in his hands. And then he opens the door and Victoria is posed as a silhouette. So at that point, we don't know even if it's her or it's Anne Reinking's character. It was such a cinematic touch. You know, Fosse really understood staging and he understood lighting. And
Definitely.
it's in every frame of all that jazz. And then Scheider takes her into the apartment, and you assume that they've been drinking a lot, and you can see he's pretty messed up. And he's slow dancing with Victoria, and he's going, "You're something else. You're something else. I mean, you know, you're great." And then she starts talking about wanting to become a star, and he seems like all confused, like, why are you asking me? Why are you asking me? She says to him, do you think I can be a star? And he, in that moment, it would have been so easy for the character of Joe Gideon to say, of course, baby, of course, you're going to be a big star. But Joe Gideon is an honest broker. And even if it means he's not going to get laid tonight, he tells her the truth. And what I love about the movie is, at first she takes it hard because it's somebody like shattering your dream. But within moments, she has respect for him telling her the truth. And in a way, it makes her want to go to bed with him even more. And she turns around and says, do you want to go to bed? And so Gideon almost gets the best of both worlds. He gets to be kind of this, I wouldn't call him misogynistic because he loves women. And I think the definition of a misogynist is someone who hates women. But he's certainly maybe less respectful of their feelings than he should be. But the women who come into his life, I do feel they realize that this man has a reputation for being this way. But they also love the idea of becoming his muses. And they take away a lot artistically from him. They love being in the aura of this man who I believe was a genius. And he's super charismatic. And so I feel there's a trade-off for them. And I guess it works in Gideon's favor. But he's also instilling confidence and belief in them and turning Victoria into a better dancer and pushing her. And even as Anne Reinking says, he was a tough taskmaster in terms of getting the best performance out of us. But you wouldn't say to an Olympic athlete, oh, that's okay, you know, to protect their feelings. They wanted him to be tough. They wanted him to have standards. And I think they did find him very interesting and charismatic because when you look at Bob Fosse and you see interviews with him, he wasn't obviously the most handsome man, but he had charisma and he had a very wry sense of humor.
Yes.
And I saw this interview with him, I guess it was on a British talk show, and the guy said, and he referenced an old-time choreographer, it was a woman who was a fan of Fosse's, but she said he's made sex unerotic with these choreographies he's been doing. And then Fosse sort of takes that in and goes, well, you know, I love this woman. I'll always respect her, but I'm amazed at her memory that she even remembers what sex is, taking a shot at her age.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was smart as hell.
And maybe the word also to use to describe his character, at least in the movie, is a philanderer. rather than someone who's misogynistic, although by today's standards, certain individuals might call the movie both things. But the thing is, or the character both things, I don't have an issue with it anyway because you should be able to depict any human behavior in a work of art. I think part of the problem with today's culture in the West is that people take the mere representation of something as an endorsement of it.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
this is,
that's part of the problem here. Because, for example, you have far worse behaviors depicted in other movies, and I'm not talking about current movies only. I'm talking movies at any point in time. For example, gangsters murdering people, and you won't have as much of an objection to that.
if the only
So there's
movies,
also a
if the
double
only mo
standard.
yeah, if the only movies we have are decent Jimmy Stewart persona type characters fighting the system, they're boring, and I do find those boring.
And even Jimmy Stewart could be dark like in Vertigo. So
Yeah, but
there you go.
Joe Gideon is a fascinating character
He
because,
is.
he's at war with himself, he's at war with the system. I fully believe All That Jazz is also a commentary and a criticism on the film industry itself,
Oh, it is. And
with the
Broadway.
meddling executives and the money pinching and the lack of understanding of the artistry that someone like Joe Gideon or Fosse is bringing to these projects. But the irony at the same time is 20th Century Fox let him make this incredibly complex, risky movie. So whoever was calling the shots over there at Fox, and I don't know to what degree they challenged Fosse or had negative comments about the final cut or his director's cut, they let him make this incredible movie, which in of itself, nobody is spending the equivalent of 80 to 100, $120 million today to make a semi-autobiographical story about a choreographer with demons and sort of poor behavior when it comes to women or
No, and for that matter, I don't know if there's any
and
choreographer today
and
who is that famous to begin with,
yeah,
right? Who today is Bob Fosse?
and letting him take a hugely abstract approach to it.
That's right.
So, I mean, the whole sequence when he's dying in the hospital in the end, and the dancing, and the each one of the important people in his life having a dedicated number and calling him out. And my jaw drops when I see this movie because it's not just somebody out on a high wire taking risks with an audacious approach to a semi-autobiographical take in his life. It's so well thought out.
It is.
Each one of these numbers and the sections, and even down to the costume designs, which Albert Wolski won an Oscar for, when they're dancing in these leotards at the end that look like blood corpuscles or arteries. Everything is so smart and related to the situation happening on screen. And the Ben Vereen show, which is foreshadowed all throughout the film. And of course, we know Joe Gideon's eventually going to be guest starring on the Ben Vereen show at the end of his life. It's really breathtaking what a good film this is, and it should be regarded in much higher esteem than it is today. I'm not saying it lacks a certain amount of steam because it's in the Criterion collection, but if I went on the street today and asked 17 or 18, 25-year-olds if they've seen All That Jazz, I'm pretty sure they haven't. I'm pretty sure they haven't even heard of it.
That's right. It is a more, at least to my mind, a more user-friendly version of Eight and a Half. It also has a more dynamic protagonist, which is another reason why I prefer All That Jazz. I still like Eight and a Half, but I just think narratively it's a bit more muddled than it needs to be. It doesn't flow as well, and the characters are not as
Well,
interesting.
Eight and a Half is way surreal, almost to the point that it's up its own ass, but in a fun way, but not in a way that has the logical
No,
extensions that you see in All That Jazz. Like All That Jazz gets very abstract at times, and the cutting style.
the Wagner sequence in Eight and a Half, though, is astonishing. I think it's the best choreographed sequence in the film. But in All That Jazz, every sequence is exquisitely well crafted.
I wanted to say the cutting style by Alan Heim, who I think is the most valuable player almost in Bob Fosse's department heads. I mean, they all are. Everybody does such a magnificent job. But Alan Heim, and he did win an Oscar for his editing on this film. The editing is this may be the best edited film I've ever seen in my life. And the only other one I would put up there is also a musical, is Oliver Stone's The Doors, I think is another phenomenally edited
How about
movie.
JFK?
I like the editing in JFK, and I think it fits the movie for sure. That's what I call Oliver Stone's.
It's what I call his post-cubist
Yeah, yeah.
style.
It starts in JFK, and then by the time he does Natural Born Killers and U-Turn, it's in full Cubist crazy mode. But in The Doors, he hadn't gone there as extreme yet. He hadn't gone there with the weird subliminals and a lot of the speed changes and a lot of stuff that made that period of his films so psychedelic in a way.
Yes.
But All That Jazz is not psychedelic. It's very postmodern.
It's dreamlike. It's dreamlike at
But
times.
but the cutting style, sometimes it's just super fast. It's like rapid fast. And I know it was Alan Heim talked about this where he first started doing this with Lenny. And he has worked with Fosse for many movies. When he came on to Lenny, he found that Dustin Hoffman's monologues were not playing that well on screen, or they didn't feel as funny. And he suggested to Fosse, let me go in and make these abstract cuts and intercut with Lenny's actual performance and then other stuff that was happening on screen. And apparently Dustin Hoffman hated it. Even when he got an Oscar nomination, he wasn't very gracious towards Heim and Fosse for how they cut the movie.
Do you like that movie?
I do like that movie, but I don't think it's at all on the level of All That Jazz.
Same here. I don't like it anywhere near as much as Cabaret or All That Jazz. And by the way, I said earlier that Cabaret and All That Jazz vie for my favorite Bob Fosse movie. What I meant by that is in terms of his direction. I do actually prefer Cabaret as a comprehensive film to All That Jazz, but I love both of them, and they're both on my giant favorites list.
I don't think Cabaret comes anywhere close to being as good as All That Jazz. I mean, it's a good movie, but All That Jazz...
I love both of them.
I think All That Jazz is just the apex of Fosse's skill set.
Yeah, as a director,
experience.
Oh, for sure. It's obviously it's his most autobiographical film, but it's also, you could say, the fullest expression of his directorial style.
I also think the editing was very groundbreaking for the time. And you can see how it influenced, for example, Darren Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream, right? That sequence where Fosse wakes up each morning to Vivaldi and the pill popping and the eye drop taking. And it's showtime, folks. The way Alan Heim cuts that and the way Fosse shot that, you see Aronofsky taking that for Requiem for a Dream every time they take drugs. And it shows you how influential the whole format of All That Jazz is.
For sure. In some ways, I guess you could say it is a precursor to Oliver Stone's post-cubist style because it has that vertical editing style.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that Oliver Stone explored the limits of what I'm calling personally a post-cubist style because he's beginning where the cubists left off.
And then Tony Scott went there.
Yeah, Tony Scott went there.
With Man on Fire and Domino, where I think on Man on Fire, he calibrated it really well. It was hugely original and dynamic. But by the time he got into Domino, it was almost incomprehensible what he was trying to achieve. Even though I like Domino, I think Domino is an interesting movie, but he went so far with that. By the way, it's not just in the editing, and I don't know if that relates to All That. I don't think it relates to All That Jazz, but with Man on Fire, a lot of that's in camera using hand crank camera. So it's creating like a jagged editing style with the light pops of the exposure pops and going from very fast, high speed down to slow motion. A lot of that, and we did some of that in Running Scared too, very selectively. A lot of people mistake that for the editing. I would say most of that is in the camera work.
Yes. But yeah, I think Oliver Stone explored the limits of that particular post-cubist style more than any other director, at least to date. And then if you look at other editing styles, let's say that are more classical, although somewhat still modernist, like let's say Psycho, I think that's one of the best edited movies of all time, the original Psycho.
Yeah,
and a number of Spielberg films, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Schindler's List.
When you're talking about Spielberg, though, that's all shot construction. Spielberg brings it to the stage with Spielberg's long composition reinventing takes. I think he's edited as
well, that's definitely a factor. Yeah.
Yeah. But when I think of Spielberg, I think of Spielberg bringing the finished take directly to the editing room. Whereas what Alan Heim does on All That Jazz is he takes Bob Fosse's tons of footage and reinvents it and cuts it to such a rhythm in a very postmodern way.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I said
ties into with Joe Gideon's state of mind, right? This guy is stoned. He's working on excess adrenaline. It's such a beautifully calibrated edit of a film that is in sync with the filmmaker and the subject matter.
Yes. And those Spielberg films that I mentioned before, for the most part, they are examples of what you could call classical or more formalist editing styles. Of course, they also are groundbreaking in their, editing techniques as well, but they're not as aggressively abstract or semi-abstract, and there's not a lot of intercutting in a what I call post-cubist way. So yeah, definitely that's there to consider. But yeah, those are some of the films that I consider the best edit of all time. The Oliver Stone films I mentioned specifically JFK, but also Born on the Fourth of July, Nixon, and Natural Born Killers, even U-Turn. I think that's also it's a masterpiece, but it's an underrated and neglected one. To me, that's Touch of Evil for the 1990s. And then you have Alfred Hitchcock movies and various other movies from the golden age of Hollywood, which I think are masterpieces of construction, editing wise and in other ways. But for me, what it boils down to, when I think something is well edited, it's breaking everything down to its essence. That's going to be different for every film, right? It's going to manifest itself differently. But that's what I'm sort of getting at. I like visual precision.
By the way, that very hallucinatory editing style that started with Oliver Stone in JFK, that was Hank Corwin. This editor came in, and because I followed sort of the movies that he did. Stone was using David Branner and Julie Monroe. And then when Hank Corwin came into JFK, I believe, where he wasn't one of the principal editors at that point, if I'm not mistaken, he started bringing in that psychedelic hallucinatory cutting. And then he graduated to being one of the main editors on Natural Born Killers and U-Turn. And that's where Stone is really going for that. It's interesting because you don't always think of the voice of the editor having such an artful impact on a film. A lot of times we think this is what the director has staged it to be. But in the cases of, let's say, Hank Corwin and then Alan Heim, I think Alan Heim had such a huge imprint on Fosse's work, specifically All That Jazz. And for a film that was shot in 35 millimeter that didn't have digital editing, the 2-frame, 3-frame cuts that he uses in All That Jazz, I know had to have been a pain in the ass to figure out how to do that on a work print. I mean, they must have been going to the lab like every day for reprints on stuff to see if it was working, because some of those cuts, they couldn't be made straight into the negative. That smaller cut, a 1-frame, a 2-frame cut, had to be processed through a lab before you could do, just because you couldn't cut in a single frame into the negative without losing some sprockets and things. So I think that was interesting. I wanted to say, we talked about Saturday Night Fever, and we talked about what a lame sequel Staying Alive was. While a little bit enjoyable, I still think it was lame. While watching All That Jazz, I thought All That Jazz could have been the real sequel to Saturday Night Fever. If you can imagine, and it kind of was in a way, because if you imagine Tony Manero finding himself vying for the lead role in a Joe Gideon production and getting between, say, Gideon and Anne Reinking, which is not that far off from the plot of Staying Alive, but let's say it's executed close in tone to Saturday Night Fever, maintaining the grit and sexuality of Saturday Night Fever, which is there in All That Jazz.
Well, that's another thing that links them, definitely. Yeah, the grit and the sexuality for sure.
Yeah, instead of turning it into a limp extended music video, I'm so curious to read Norman Wexler's original script for Staying Alive, because I'm convinced he saw All That Jazz and said, I'm going to do All That Jazz with Tony Manero. But when Stallone came on, he obviously had a different take on it. And Staying Alive blatantly rips off the opening sequence from All That Jazz with the Cattle Call Dance edition. So I just find it fascinating that Staying Alive could have being All That Jazz in a way. And obviously it would have been a poor imitation, I guess, but there was a way to do it to make it really interesting, and they sort of pussy down on it.
Well, also, All That Jazz has a protagonist who is somewhat intellectual, if not outright intellectual, whereas obviously Tony from Saturday Night Fever is not.
No,
So
he's the complete opposite.
exactly. So it's hard to imagine what, for example, let's say if there were dream sequencers or something added, what that would look like. But
But you have the director character in Staying Alive that is very much a little bit of a riff on Bob Fosse. And it would have been interesting to see him pitted against sort of the raw, uneducated, animalistic qualities of Tony Manero,
oh, it would have been.
going up against Bob Fosse, this consummate artist, but also a total womanizer. It would have been fascinating to see that movie, but I guess we will never see it.
Well, who knows? With AI, anything's possible. You can just tell it to make the movie for you.
So the character that Leyland Palmer plays in All That Jazz is definitely based on Gwen Verdon. And she's not given as much screen time as Anne Reinking or the daughter, who's also excellent, Erzbet Foldy, who only did one movie, I believe. But it's interesting how Fosse cherry picks from different parts of his life.
Well, yes. I mean, look, here's the thing. If the character of Joe Gideon weren't so charming, the movie wouldn't work. It works because he is charming and seductive. That's very important to notice.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't be able to forgive his narcissism if he didn't have a way to compensate for it.
Well, the narcissism is self destructive, and even his inability to commit to women he loves is self destructive. So we're not seeing a character that's coming out on top from this behavior. And I think clearly
No, but I
Fosse
mean,
understood
just
that about himself.
correct. But what I mean is, without the charm that the character has,
Well,
we might
he
not
has
be
to
like the movie
charm.
might not be palatable.
Well, I don't
Um,
think anybody wants to see or make the movie where this character, this
yeah.
Joe Gideon character, isn't charming, because that's the whole point. He's a rakish, super intelligent artist.
Well, I'm not going to name which movies specifically, but there are a number of movies that have been made this century, specifically, let's say after 2010, that have very almost robot-like protagonists who are full of themselves and entitled, and they're not charming. They're robotic, like I said. And somehow the audience is either supposed to root for them or identify with them, and I find that a curious phenomenon. Here, at least, you have a protagonist who is flawed, but he also has compensations, which I find a decent balance. But also, of course, the movie's not endorsing any of his negative behaviors. So if anyone were to be offended by the movie today, or even at the time, if anyone were offended by the protagonist's behaviors that are untoward, let's say, I would say, well, how do you warn people? Or how do you teach people not to misbehave if you can't show the negative behavior on screen or in a book or whatever medium we're talking about?
Yeah. Other reasons why the film would not be in vogue today is it has a lot of nudity. And if you take the entire erotica sequence, which I think is
I think we just lost the family audience.
well, yeah, and it's a phenomenal
It's a great
sequence.
line. Once the
Yes.
nudity starts to occur.
I mean, that sequence is amazing. And
It
you have
is.
to be a big shout out to Sandel Bergman, who seemed like she was the lead dancer in that sequence, and also being very courageous, all those dancers, in willing to take their clothes off, obviously in the name of art. And the sequence was also very forward in that it showed a lot of gay
Yeah.
imagery in that sequence. It wasn't just here's some heterosexual, beautiful new dancers all over each other. It was a very
And not only that,
inclusive. It was a very inclusive
correct,
sequence.
but there are also moments where secondary characters are telling Joe that he has a feminine side.
Yeah.
So that's also going on throughout the movie in various ways, sometimes overtly, sometimes not. So there's a lot of sexual ambiguity in this movie in general. And by the way, there's plenty of that in Cabaret too.
Yeah. In that sequence and in other sequences throughout the film, you can clearly see that Bob Fosse worships, in a way, the human body, the
Yes.
perfect idealism of the human body and the way it should function. And he was a dancer himself, but
A great dancer. He's an underrated dancer. Michael Jackson
yeah,
borrowed, I don't know how many moves from him, but even
and
for,
wanted him to direct Thriller.
that's right. But
And
have
Fosse
you ever
found
seen the movie The
Jackson
Little
too weird.
Prince? Have you ever seen the movie The
I
Little
no, I know
Prince?
he's in it. I haven't seen it.
Because his dance, or one of the sequences, I should say, looks like a series of Michael Jackson moves. So he must have lifted them from that particular movie.
Well, when Sam Wasson was talking about, because he did the autobiography of Fosse, And he was talking about how Michael Jackson, who's seen as the king of hip hop, was hugely influenced by Fosse. Then he determines that Bob Fosse is actually the father of hip hop in the way he choreographed these performances. And Bob Fosse will describe it himself, or Anne Reinking describes it as that Fosse had kind of like a strange posture problem. So he created these dance moves as a way to compensate for his own posture,
That's
which is what
fascinating.
gave this angular kind of very Fosse-like choreography
Correct.
into being, and which then people have basically ripped off ever since Fosse was around. And I find that so interesting as well. And Fosse, like everybody else, his big dream was to be something else. Fosse wanted to be a famous dancer. He wanted to be front and center. He only settled for choreography because he felt he wasn't going to ever become the star on stage. And I think it was, I forget the name of, I think he was one of his wives, I forget her name, basically suggested to him that because he was so good at choreography and actually a really good dancer, like you said, that he should transition into choreography and make his name through that. And through that, he was able to become a director too, when he got his opportunity to direct Sweet Charity.
Yes.
Which, what I find amazing, especially in context of today, Sweet Charity was not a successful film. And Fosse talks about feeling like he was worried he wasn't ever going to get another job as a director. And then somehow he lands Cabaret, which is mind-boggling to me because he only waited like a year and a half to get another movie. In today's timeline, a year and a half between movies, you're rocking it. So back then, you could direct a movie that is not deemed a box office success or maybe even not a critical success, and people would still give you a shot at directing something else. If Bob Fosse directed Sweet Charity today and got the result that that film had, he would never direct again because he was a first-time director. He was known more as a choreographer. And yet somehow, I don't quite know the story of how he got Cabaret. Obviously, he was a great choreographer, and he was able to sell the studio on him doing it.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, and I don't know if we'll ever know the full story, is that Bob Fosse was friends with many other geniuses, including Paddy Chayefsky. So people could have recommended him to certain other people, and then that's how he ended up landing certain jobs. I don't know that for sure. Also, people greatly respected him, so that helps too, right? If powerful people are your friends and or they greatly respect you, it can make a difference in your career.
Yeah. So it was the year that Bob Fosse won the Oscar for Cabaret. He won the Tony for something. Do you know what it was? And then he won an Emmy for Eliza with a Z. It's never been achieved again in history. And
Pippin.
so he wins the Oscar for Cabaret. He wins the Tony for Pippin, and he wins an Emmy for Eliza with a Z. Can you imagine that happening to somebody today and not becoming a narcissist? I mean, yeah, if anyone deserves the mantle of becoming a narcissist, it's that guy. And you know what happened after that? He went into a huge depression. It actually made him think, have I peaked? And will I ever have another moment like this? And any human being would, in a way, have those questions. What was the movie did right after Cabaret? It was Lenny. Was it Lenny, I think?
Yes.
But by the time he arrives at All That Jazz, I don't care if he didn't have any other Broadway shows or any other TV specials.
If you meant as a director, it's Lenny.
Yeah, as a director. If all you've ever directed in your life is All That Jazz, you're in the pantheon of great filmmakers, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's interesting because he didn't make that many movies as a director, relatively speaking, and yet a number of them have been disproportionately influential.
Yeah.
So Cabaret in particular and All That Jazz in particular. But there were other movies, like for example, Star 80, that sort of developed a cult following or were influential to certain key.
And even Lenny, the structure of Lenny, telling the story
Yes.
of a well-known or a real person and intercutting it with on-screen interviews. I don't know if that had even been done before Lenny, but you see that in so many movies today.
Well, actually, yeah, maybe not to that extent, but even, for example, a movie like Take the Money and Run, the Woody Allen movie, which was his first film that wasn't just a redubbed movie, as a director I'm talking about, it
Right.
also has that structure to a certain extent. And there are other ones before that as well, but yeah, maybe not to the same extent as Lenny.
But I think he made it cool. I think
Yeah,
because I've
that's right. He made it
seen
hip. Okay.
also why this film would also have a hard time getting made today the way it was made is Joe's backstory as a 15-year-old dancer in the burlesque club. And there's literally a scene where you see these burlesque dancers come up to him and masturbate him right before he goes on stage.
Yeah.
And then he's on stage and he's got this big stain on his pants. I mean, that scene is pretty transgressive.
Yeah, it is.
And that a studio were like, sure, let's do it. But it's also interesting how it's the reverse predatory behavior. It's not men doing it to women, it's women doing it to men. And that was absolutely a real story. Bob Fosse swears that that happened. And Sam Wazan, when talking about the Fosse book, says when Fosse was editing all that jazz and those scenes came up, he said, that is exactly my life. That's what happened.
Well, that's
So I find
interesting.
that very interesting how when you do see underage seduction and all that jazz, it's done by women to men.
Yeah, but then if you want to go down that road, how many movies could we talk about that have similar things? Maybe not as explicit, but how many movies feature an older woman seducing a younger man or boy?
No, of course, it was a whole genre in the 80s
And even
until,
since the dawn of time, basically.
oh,
We have
yeah.
so many examples. But, or like, how about that movie, Summer of 42 from 1971?
Yeah, and then you had Class with Jacqueline Bisset, you had Homework with Joan Collins, you had all these Sylvia Crystal films.
Or HUD.
Yeah. And look, that's another thing that today people make this huge deal out of as if like a 15, 16-year-old boy getting seduced by a beautiful 30-year-old woman is considered sex abuse. I guess legally it is, but it's also the fantasy of every 15, 16-year-old boy. And
And
I
there
don't
needs to
think
be space for that in the arts, regardless of what the social mores may be outside the realm of art. I think that the realm of art always has to be open for exploring, for lack of a better word, dirty topics or transgressive topics,
absolutely,
because that's how you can
absolutely.
safely deal with anything that might be taboo. So, meaning we now live at a time where people are very schizophrenic when it comes to sexuality, and there's this touch me, don't touch me idea. You know, in certain ways, people are objectified more than ever, but in other ways, they aren't. It's a very strange time we're living in. Like on one hand, we're as prudish as the Victorians, but then on the other, we're living in the Weimar Republic. We're living in cabaret.
Well, we're prudish outwardly, but you could go on the internet to these porn sites and you could see some of the most extreme
Correct.
porn
There you
that didn't
go.
exist
There
when
you go.
when I was young. It was traditional sort of deep throat and behind the green door. And while it was hardcore pornography, it wasn't super, super transgressive pornography like you're seeing today. So
Well, so there's the
clearly,
schizophrenic nature of the time we're living in.
yeah, yet they'll shit on mainstream movies that have a little bit of edgy subject matter and movies forever, especially movies that were made in the 70s and 80s, were really breaking down barriers in terms of depicting transgressive subject matter. Like our most shit upon director that we talked about in our first episode, Bertolucci, was doing La Luna, which was a movie about incest.
Correct.
I mean, you should be able to make a movie about anything.
I agree. And the other
And
thing is, anything related to sex is not as extreme as anything related to murdering someone, for example. And we don't hold the depiction of murder to the same standard to the depiction of any sort of sex act, which is very bizarre. And there's complex reasons for that, complex theories. No one knows for sure why. Part of it is to do with the fact that if people are, sexually aroused all the time, the social fabric could disintegrate even more than it already is today. But so that could be the reason. Whereas being a hunter-gatherer, being a warrior, that actually has a practical purpose in society, even today.
I think outwardly today in media, there's this schizophrenia, like you said, of projecting that we shouldn't be excited by sexual images Yet everything you see in a commercial or in music videos that are on YouTube, let's say, everything is very sexual. It's delivered in a very sexual way. I can't
Yeah.
go on Facebook without finding a whole bunch of reels targeting me of women talking about their sexual experiences. Everything is up for grabs sexually, yet when it's done in service of a mainstream movie, suddenly everybody gets bent out of shape about
Because I
it.
think it has to do with power dynamics more than anything, right? People want, in certain cultural spaces or certain social spaces, people want to exercise power over other people. And so they use censorship or the equivalent as a cudgel to use against their enemies. I think it's as simple as that.
Or people are just fucking repressed
That
and we're
too, that
becoming
too.
more and more. Look, while the Me Too movement seemed like it was a reckoning that needed to happen on some level, it has set back male female relationships by light years because men and women don't know how to behave around each other anymore.
That's
Because
right.
typically men see a woman, they're attracted to her, they're turned on, they want to try and figure out ultimately how they're going to get that woman into bed. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that'll be intriguing about the woman to the man, but that's where it ultimately always ends. And it seems like nobody knows how to perform this mating dance anymore because we've gone from a society where men would make the first move to women to a society where women are making the first move towards men
Or no one's doing anything.
because men aren't coming onto them anymore.
Or no one's doing anything.
And the ones who are benefiting from the most are the attractive men, right? Because women aren't afraid of going up to attractive men. But the men who, let's say the average looking men who have to rely on their game to talk to women and talk them up, they're sort of getting pushed out because now you're not even supposed to come up to women and talk to her in a seductive or I just think everything is so crazy right now.
Oh, for sure.
And
Is there anything that isn't crazy right now?
I'm reading about young couples making consent videos before they have sex for the first time, or talk about killing the
Do they
spontaneity.
have to how do they have to sign some sort of agreement also, like a legal
I
document?
wouldn't be surprised. I absolutely wouldn't be surprised. Now, the consent video is to protect the dude, I guess. All I know is the whole thing is fucked up. We used to enjoy movies in the 80s where sex was fun, where it was flirtatious, where women enjoyed watching these movies. Maybe some movies went too far.
Or mysterious.
Yes, maybe some movies depicted women in an unflattering way, and a lot of the filmmakers were men. But I used to enjoy going to see movies where there was an interesting sexual dynamic going on screen.
Same,
And
like
I
that
think,
Summer of 42. That
well,
movie is timeless in the sense that it presents a common fantasy that young men have always had throughout time and always will, whether people want to admit it or not. And it's perfectly fine in the realm of art, especially in the realm of art, to explore things of that nature. Because I wouldn't necessarily recommend that everyone go out and copy what they do when they see a movie of any kind, right? So,
but not even movies
or
that
it's one of the
depict,
points of art.
but not even movies, let's say, that depict underage sex. Movies used to be sexy, like Flashdance or Indecent Proposal, or so
Yeah,
many of the Adrian Lyne films, 9.5 Weeks, even if they were dealing with transgressive subject matter.
yeah.
I mean, we talk about Risky Business. That's a sexy movie. It's got a lot more on its
It's
mind
one of the
than just,
sexiest movies ever made, and it's also a
yeah,
great satire at the same time.
yeah. It's sexy, but it's also about a lot of things. The movie we're going to talk about, Body Heat, couldn't be sexier. And if they make, and I did hear that they were remaking Body Heat or getting ready to remake it, and I cannot imagine it'll be anything like what Lawrence Kasdan put on the screen, and the chemistry and the sexuality and the nudity between William Hurt and Kathleen Turner. And also want to say, one of the things that would probably make all that jazz unmakeable today is because this behavior from Joe Gideon is coming from a middle-aged white male. So that seems like nobody wants to put on screen anymore. And that seems like if you check all those boxes, then that's unforgivable.
Which
And
also is very strange and
because it's all
contradictory.
politicized now, it's
Yeah.
completely politicized.
Again, that's what I said. It's resentful people trying to make a non-issue into an issue and then use that issue as a cudgel to destroy their enemies with.
The bottom line is if somebody has an interesting life story, regardless of the behavior they engage in, then it's worth making a movie about them. And I don't
Agreed.
think anybody can see all that jazz and come out of the theater thinking Joe Gideon is the model of male behavior in the entertainment industry or in any industry. We see
And he's
the
punished.
not only that, we see the self-destructiveness
Yeah.
that it causes in everybody's life around him, and he's aware of it. And the very reason the movie All That Jazz exists is because Bob Fosse himself was aware of it.
Yes.
And All That Jazz can be seen as a cautionary tale while entertaining, while dazzling us with the music and the dancing. And I don't think we've talked enough about the choreography and the dance sequences in this movie, because I don't think anything has been done like this since.
Oh, no, not since.
Another fun musical was
Especially not in an
Moulin
erotic
Rouge,
sense.
but it's nothing like this.
No, especially not if we're talking about an overtly erotic form of choreography.
But even in the scenes where, let's say, it's not as eroticized, like some of the stuff in the hospital at the end, with all the chorus dancers with their feathers doing these classic moves around him, and at the same time, it's timed to the beeping of the heart machine.
Yeah, very clever.
I mean, it's so smart. It's so brilliant in so many ways. The final goodbyes to all the people in his life, and Joe Gideon is running off the stage and he's having this last little reconciliatory moment with the people. I mean, it's super moving. There is all intercut sort of with what's going on with him in the hospital, where he's sort of losing his mind, and his behavior in the hospital is interesting because it gets even more self-destructive.
Yes.
They come to him and they say, you've got all these problems, and then he's throwing parties. He's had the surgery. He's throwing parties. He's drinking. He's drugging it up in the hospital room. He's having sex. All the things you do not do when you want to protect your heart and want to hold on to life. So it's interesting how all of these suicidal tendencies of Joe Gideon is built into the choreography
and perhaps he's addicted to living dangerously.
Yeah, well, clearly, because
so then he proves Freud's theory correct. There's something beyond the pleasure principle, the death drive, which is interesting.
Yes, Fosse too was just living as large a life, as a fulfilling life as he could, even while it was killing him. And I suppose when measured against some of us who lead more pedestrian lives, and we maybe live to 80, 85, we probably haven't lived a fraction of what Fosse lived in his 60 years of life. I don't think Fosse...
I don't know if he could have helped himself, though. That's the thing, see?
But I don't think he wanted to die either. I think he enjoyed it.
I don't think... Yeah, I don't think he wanted to die, but I don't think he seems, at least as depicted in the movie, he seems compulsive. And I don't know if in other words, no amount of rationalization could have prevented him from continuing his self-destructive path, potentially.
But I think the self-destructiveness of it eventually converged with the narcissism, and he almost feels like this is the way he should go out. And yet there were so many people in his life who loved him, who are trying to pull him back and give him meaning. And it's tragic the way that he sidesteps all that love, including his relationship with his daughter. And there's this great scene in the movie where he's doing these dance moves with his daughter in his apartment. And watching it, I was thinking, this is such a sweet moment, yet I absolutely believe some asshole today will watch that and go, oh, that's icky. Look at the way he's holding his daughter, and thinking beyond what beyond what is the film itself, and thinking, well, there's Roy Scheider being very creepy with this 12-year-old girl, or she's 13 or whatever she was, and it seems very intimate. But I think it's such a sweet scene, and the way it's acted and the way
it is.
It's played into the mirror. And that's the kind of thing that just makes me so insane, is these people who have these toxic mindsets want to project that onto pretty much innocent scenes in films, enjoyable scenes. So much in a film like All That Jazz seems like forbidden fruit because of the distorted viewpoint of audiences today, or social media idiots who are just looking for hits and trying to stir up controversy. And if anybody could dig up controversy, we talk about Bertolucci. Bob Fosse is just waiting there. They've made a miniseries about his flaws.
Yes.
And the miniseries just steals from All That Jazz all over the place.
What did you think of Chicago, by the way?
The movie? I thought it was okay. I enjoyed it. but I didn't feel it was Bob Fosse.
No, but
Bob
it was
Fosse,
continuing as best they could without him, his
yeah, but I
style.
think Fosse would have gone darker and way more sexual than
And
what
also, he's just a
Rob
better
Marshall did.
director. But I do like it actually now more than I ever liked it. I always liked it, but I like it now more because I actually think that and this isn't the movie itself, because of course the stage musical it's based on already had the concept, but we now live in a time when a murder can become famous and loved.
Yeah,
Like
I need to
Luigi
watch it
Mangione.
again. I've seen it only one time.
Yeah,
Um,
so I think it's more relevant today than ever before, the film and the stage musical it's based on.
what I love about Joe Gideon is that he's not sentimental. Even in the face of death or in the face of these multiple marriages, his work, he's not sentimental. But I contend that Joe Gideon is a good person. And I think he's an honest person. And within the first 5 minutes of the movie, you see all that. You see the respect that he has for the dancers who come to the cattle call.
Yes.
Even when he's telling them they haven't made the cut, he's doing it with sincerity and he's doing it with love and he's doing it with respect for what they came to give. And even though Fosse himself intercuts the moment where clearly he's hitting on the dancer Victoria, because that's just his nature, he's also showing a great sense of humor and a sense of camaraderie with these dancers. And they look up to him and they know his reputation, and clearly it's a familial thing. So I love the character of Joe Gideon. It doesn't mean I will lead my life like Joe Gideon, but I can watch this film over and over because I also love films about true artists and their dedication to their craft and their chasing of perfection, even when they know perfection isn't attainable. And one of the aspects of Gideon in this film is that he's tortured because he's always wanting to make something better. And Anne Reinking, who lived with him during this period, I believe she lived with him during this period, talks about how even when they were alone in an intimate situation or just in their apartment at night, he was always coming up with ideas on how to improve something. He had the white noise, which I can identify with in my head because I'm always thinking about scripts. And if I'm writing a script, wherever I am, I'm running things through my head, trying to improve it. Even while I might be sitting in public listening to somebody or having a meal, the white noise never stops. And I think for an artist, when the white noise
Yeah, I'm like
does,
that too, by the way. I
yeah,
never thought of it the way that you just described it, calling it white noise. But like for example, I'll go over in my head a sentence that I've written in a script or in a novel I've written, whatever, and it will just be not literally an intrusive thought, not in any sort of clinical sense, but it will keep coming back into my head again and again.
no, I was saying when the white noise stops, I think as artists, we probably have a problem. But it's like a restless state. Like I go to bed at night when I'm writing something and I'm always trying to figure things out. Why is this section not working? What can I do to improve it? What can I do that's out of left field? Or what is the original approach that hasn't been taken? I'm constantly barraged with these thoughts and ideas. And to an average person out there who is not involved in writing or the arts, they might think, wow, how can you live like that? It's exhausting. But like Joe Gideon, it's the fuel that keeps you going.
That's true.
And I think all that jazz is so effective in presenting that, as much as you see the less respectful behavior he has towards the woman. But even that, I think the way he has these encounters with these women that are outside his relationship are ways of him of just like maybe turning off the white noise, or it's a release valve. But if you ask me, the most unrealistic thing about all that jazz is how anybody who could be in a relationship with Anne Reinking at that period in her life, because she was just beyond stunning, would ever step out on her. I mean, a guy like Joe Gideon should be thanking his lucky stars that this woman would share a bed with him. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, but you can say that about a lot of romantic situations in many movies.
but
And in this
she,
particular case,
oh
it's
my
probably because
God.
he, no, no, I understand what
Yeah.
you're saying, but it's probably because within the context of this movie, it's probably because he enjoys the hunt or he enjoys
No,
the journey.
absolutely.
So in
I
other
mean, I
words,
don't
even
mean
if he
it's not,
has the best possible
yeah,
woman with him at any given point, it's his restless nature. He needs to find some other person. He can't just,
exactly,
he's never
exactly.
satisfied even with the best.
But I feel like taking him outside and punching him in the face and saying, "Man, look what you
Yeah,
have."
no, it is crazy.
She's beyond beautiful. She's beyond talented. She seems like a good person. She bonds with his daughter. Why would you jeopardize that? But then you can say that about everything in Joe Gideon's life.
Yeah.
Everything of value that he has in all that jazz, he's willing to put on the line because he's about self-destruction, narcissism, and self-sabotage. And it's painful to watch as much as it's enjoyable on some weird level.
And that's another reason why the movie is such a delicate balancing act. Not just the fact that it's balancing the abstract with the tangible, but it's also balancing the disgusting with the charming, right? The repulsive with the endearing. And it's just a miracle that the movie works because it in many ways shouldn't. Because, you brought up an interesting point that at least in the movie, Joe Gideon doesn't seem to, and then by extension, perhaps Bob Fosse himself, Joe Gideon doesn't seem to have a sentimental side. And maybe that's what he's missing, because if he did have more sentimentality, he would cherish things, like, for example, any woman, in particular, or even his own daughter, right? Like, in other words, if he had a more sentimental attachment to any of these people, maybe he wouldn't take them for granted. Who knows? It's actually a very good question.
It's weird because I think it's a little about lack of empathy on some level.
Yeah.
You know, if
You could even say he's a psychopath. I'm not going to go that far.
No. But if you betray the person in your life that you're in a relationship with or your wife, part of the ability to do the betrayal is giving up the empathy on how this person is going to feel if they found out.
Correct. And in his particular case, at least as depicted in the movie, and actually, I guess we do need to be careful of who we're talking about, right? Are we talking about the actual Bob Fosse? Or are we
No,
talking
I'm
about Joe
talking
Gideon?
about Joe Gideon.
Yeah, so if we're talking about Joe Gideon, yeah, okay, that's probably the smarter thing to do. But because we don't know for sure what the actual Bob Fosse was thinking or doing in all cases, but the character does lack empathy, and
he lacks empathy, but not soul, which is an interesting distinction that I make, which is he's not always sensitive to these women in his life because it's mostly the women that he seems to do wrong to. He's not sensitive to hurting them, or he's aware that he's hurting them, but it feels like it's an okay trade-off in the moment to get the high out of a new relationship or a new encounter. But he's not a man without soul and without decency, and that's what makes him such a complex, compelling character to me, because he's not a villain. And there's a part of us that goes, wow, wouldn't it be cool to just be able to walk over to one of these beautiful dancers and smooth talk her and she's in your bed that night? But most of us live within a certain rule structure and we know how to moderate behavior. But that doesn't mean, as the audience, we can't watch a man do these things and not be intrigued by it, and sometimes maybe even a little envious. But that's why I bring up the Anne Reinking thing, because when you've got a woman as beautiful and talented in your life as Anne Reinking, you would think you would focus your attentions on her how to keep her happy and keep her from walking out the door. But instead, he's like throwing the door wide open and saying, step out anytime you want. However, whenever she starts to suggest to him that she may be looking to an alternate future and this guy wants to date, or she's been asked to go do the show out of town because you're not giving me enough attention or you're not giving me enough commitment, his first reaction is, go, baby, I don't care. And then he thinks about it and he goes, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm pushing out the door the best thing in my life. And he quickly tries to, which is mostly bullshit, bring her back and say things are going to be this way or that way. And it's enough for her to come back because she just wants the slightest excuse. Just give me something. Just give me something to keep me here. And it's painful watching it because the level of self-destruction within his relationships is painful for the audience to watch. It frustrates me. But what's interesting is all these women in his life, like the Audrey character, which is the Gwen Verdon influenced character, she clearly still loves him. And when they do their little dance rehearsal moment, clearly you see the affection is still there. And I feel like within the context of the movie, if Joe Gideon snapped his fingers and said, I want you back, she would have thrown herself into his arms. You see the relationship with Victoria, the other dancer. He's not abusive to her, but he's hard on her in the dance rehearsal studio. And yet, when he makes her a better dancer in that moment, or she's able to surpass what she's doing, she looks to him with such love and desire that some of these women seem to, they all want his affirmation, which is this amazing talent that he or Bob Fosse also had. He was very seductive and they loved the idea of being muses to him.
Yes, which is a fascinating situation in and of itself.
I mean, we should all be that lucky out there, right?
Yeah, but it's funny because when we were doing our James Bond episodes, we mentioned a few times how the James Bond character is this fantasy figure that many men would vicariously be interested in following around. But to live that way in real life is a different story. And then that, of course, begs the question, what is the purpose of art, especially when it comes to these types of works of art?
Well, these lives that, let's say, Joe Gideon or James Bond lead, they're fantasy, but they're not practical in life.
No.
They're not practical if you want to have continuity and have somebody be in your life who knows you at the end of your life or even within years. They're not practical for anything other than sort of momentary sensation or the stimulation of what's become the normal, or we all hit ruts in our life, or we all look in the mirror and go, is this all there is? Whereas James Bond is out there doing death-defying missions and meeting hot women all the time and sleeping with them. But those aren't, for most people, for 99.9% of the people on this planet, those aren't realistic expectations for human beings. Now, the 0.01% of movie stars, glamorous movie stars, both male and female, if they wanted to lead a life like that, they could. But even for them, I think it would become exhausting and shallow. And
Yeah,
they would...
and that goes back to what I was saying before. I think many works of art provide us with a what if scenario, and they're asking us questions or they're sparking questions in us. And that's enough. I mean, a work of art can do other things besides what I just said, but in the case of a movie like All That Jazz, basically the audience is supposed to ask, do we approve of this behavior? Would it be fun to try some of these things? Maybe we shouldn't, right? These are the ideas that are floating around in our heads when we're watching this movie or thinking about it after the fact.
Well, even with James Bond, for example, the James Bond film that I connect with most in terms of the storyline is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Because On Her Majesty's Secret Service actually takes the approach of what if James Bond became a normal person at the end of the movie?
Yes.
What if James Bond fell in love, gave up the womanizing, decided to become monogamous, picked this incredible woman to do it with, and led a normal life? But that can't be James Bond because the fiction of James Bond can't continue. So then she has to die. But in the death scene, it's really heartfelt.
Now
because,
here's it, but that
well, I
brings
just want
up
to
an
say
interest.
this.
Yeah.
I just want to say this because we're not only mourning Tracy's death, we're mourning the normal life that James Bond could have had. So it's an interesting James Bond ending in a James Bond film because it's suggesting that even James Bond is tired of the James Bond life. But the powers that be that are bigger than James Bond, meaning Ian Fleming and the producers and Peter Hunt, will not let James Bond have that life, because then the excitement and the superficial excitement of all that goes out the window. So they have to kill Tracy in order to prolong the fantasy.
But I would also say that James Bond, as depicted in the movies, specifically the first 20, is a better person in many respects than Joe Gideon because he doesn't mistreat the women that he at least enjoys being with to the extent that he does. Like, for example, he doesn't have...
He's not above sleeping with women to get information out of them or
No, but that's his
sleeping
job as a spy. Yeah, but that's a different story altogether.
The difference
I'm
between
talking...
the difference between Joe Gideon and James Bond is James Bond thinks about the bigger picture of the world and how to keep the
Well, that
world
also,
safe.
yeah, and that's also, and I was about to
And
say
Joe
that
Gideon
saves the
thinks
world.
about Joe Gideon.
Exactly. So no, but even I was building to that. The fact that James Bond ultimately, on multiple occasions, saves the world. He's sort of entitled to do a few maybe naughty things every now and then. But even throwing that aside, I don't think James Bond in any of the movies, specifically the first 20, I don't think he ever behaves as poorly as Joe Gideon does to, let's say, his own daughter or the women that have meant the most to him in his life. I could
Well,
be wrong about that.
I'm
I'm
making light.
subjective.
I'm making light of this, but I will say that after every mission where James Bond ends up in the arms of a beautiful woman, he's abandoned her by the next film. So he is Joe Gideon in
No,
a
but
way.
we don't know what happened. Yeah, but we don't know. We don't. Maybe at the end of each movie where he ends up with someone that he thinks is an ally, she actually turns out to be,
Well,
a
then
henchwoman.
he's serially bad at picking women because
Well, he is.
If
He
I'm
is
Sean
though.
Connery, if I'm James Bond, Sean Connery in From Russia with Love, and I've got Daniela Bianchi in my arms at the end of the movie, that's the end of the series. I'm done. I'm hanging it up and I'm spending my time in Venice with her or wherever.
Yeah, and in an extremely perverse plot twist, he ends up with Rosa Klebb. But anyway,
In your James Bond film.
in some sort of like Harold and Maude version.
Well,
So here's the
let's talk.
thing.
Okay.
Oh no, you go on.
No, I was going to say let's talk a little bit about the cast of the film because I think it's an incredible
Roy
cast.
Scheider gives an amazing performance.
Unbelievable. He should have won the Oscar.
I think so. Of the or
Dustin
tied, I would.
Hoffman won it for Kramer versus Kramer, which is a good movie, but I don't think anything on the level of All That Jazz.
For me, it would have been for Best Actor that year of the nominees. It would have been a tie between Al Pacino in Injustice for All and Roy Scheider and All That Jazz.
I love Pacino in And Justice for All, and I really like that movie, but I don't think, again, it's on the level of Roy Scheider. I think.
But regardless, I love Roy Scheider in this movie, so it doesn't really matter who the award went to. I still think he's incredible in
And
this
did you
movie.
know, and you probably did because you know everything, but Richard Dreyfuss was supposed to play Joe Gideon. And Richard Dreyfuss, I guess, had creative differences or he wasn't in the right headspace to do it and he left the production. And Bob Fosse didn't shut down the production nor did the studio, thankfully. And they were able to recast, but they kept the crew on for like 2 months, paying them while they recast the lead role. And when I look at the movie, I don't think I can see Richard Dreyfuss in this role. I just don't see it. So maybe Dreyfuss' own instincts were right, although Dreyfuss regretted it afterwards immensely. But
Actually, I could see him in the role. It would obviously be different if he were in the role, but I could see him in it because Richard Dreyfuss in general has this sort of cynical,
But
self-referential
he didn't
demeanor.
have the physicality that Roy
No,
Scheider
no,
did. And
no.
remember, Bob Fosse was a dancer. I don't look at Richard Dreyfuss and I see a dancer's body there.
No, but
But Roy,
personality-wise, I could see how he could do
yes, a
it.
little bit in the personality, but Roy Scheider was always a very well-built guy. When you see him in Marathon Man, in that
I was
sequence
just going to
where
say
the
that.
assassin comes to kill him in the
Yeah, he's
hotel room,
very fit.
he is ripped. And
Yeah.
even in All That Jazz, he's ripped. You see that.
And by the way,
So
he had a great 70s run.
oh my God, he is the most underrated actor of the 70s. People forget about it. You know, French Connection, Jaws, All
Marathon
That
Man.
Jazz, Marathon Man, The Seven Ups, another great one. Roy Scheider's, he's even really good in this movie
Oh,
that
and
nobody's.
Sorcerer.
Sorcerer, Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York. Is that the title? I think he was great in that. Everything that
Very
Scheider,
versatile. And for some reason, though, he doesn't have that kind of reputation. I'm not sure
because he didn't
why.
have the razzmatazz of like a traditional movie star. He was just a good fucking actor,
Yeah.
and wasn't an unattractive man. I think you know he wasn't like Warren Beatty, but he felt like he was always had a strong screen presence to me, and he always seemed very capable. But this is clearly, I know a lot of people will say Jaws, but this is the role. You know, this is an incredibly difficult role. He had to learn all these dance moves. He had to learn the dance terminology, which Anne Reinking said he did, even when you don't hear it on screen. When he's talking to the dancers in the opening cattle call, he's using the terminology to them. The music is playing over that. But she said he worked really hard. And just the way he carries himself in this film, it's a fucking difficult role to
It
play.
is.
You're emulating Bob Fosse to a certain degree, but you're also playing this man going through all this turmoil and physical pain and all these mood swings. And I love him in this film. I love this film. As you can tell, I think it's great. And we're going to talk about the rest of the cast members. But Bob Fosse directs the shit out of this film. It is so well made. He's camera angles. He never puts the camera in the wrong place. I'm never looking at this film thinking, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Why are you making that cut? Everything is so perfect.
Yes. And by the way, we didn't mention that it won the Golden Palm, tied with an Akira
Yeah, I was
Kurosawa
gonna.
movie.
Oh, no, Palme d'Or. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I was gonna mention that, which is a really big deal.
it is.
I mean, I wouldn't mind winning the Palme d'Or and then going on and having all the Oscar nominations.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't mind either. It's not there are worse things that can happen to you.
And
Oh, by the way, I love how he references Stanley Kubrick in the movie. Who, by the way, Kubrick loved the movie. He said at one point he said it was the best film I think I've ever seen.
well, I can believe that. Kubrick had some strange taste in movies, though. But on this one, if you told me that All That Jazz was the number one film at the AFI Best Films of All Time, I'm down with that. And this was an early performance of Jessica Lange. I'm not
Yes.
sure what all her credits were up to that point, but I think she had
She was in the King
mostly
Kong
King
remake.
Kong. Is that all? And she didn't get good reviews in King Kong, as I remember. And people kind of thought, well, maybe this woman isn't going to have a career. But then she does All That Jazz and kind of blows up from that. And she's great in All That Jazz.
Yes. I mean, she's one of my favorite actresses. I think
Oh,
she's
yeah. I
I
think
love her earthiness, which is very rare.
she's a one of a kind. I don't
Yeah.
think there's another Jessica Lange or there ever will be. She has so many unique qualities. She's sexy, she's earthy, she's authentic, and she did so many great performances during this period. But obviously for me, Frances, where she plays Frances Farmer. Now talk about an underrated movie. That movie
It is underrated.
is brilliant. I would have given her the Best Actress Oscar for Frances over Meryl Streep, who won it for Sophie's Choice, which is a good movie, but I think Frances is
And
much
she's also
superior.
great in Blue Sky, which she did win an Oscar for. She's also great in Cape Fear.
She's
Many
great.
movies.
She's great in Tootsie, which she won an Oscar for that same year as Frances. She
Yes.
got the supporting actress Oscar for that. The Postman Always Rings Twice. Is there a sexier love scene in the history of film where an actress does not take her clothes off? I couldn't. I couldn't tell you that one. Yeah, she's fantastic and beautiful,
Yes. And eccentric, which is interesting
very
too.
eccentric. And I
Like
always
even the way she
love,
carries herself, just
and I
everything
always,
about her.
yeah, and I always loved the Jessica Lange Sam Shepard pairing. And
Hmm.
I could see how those two ended up together. And it was a bit tragic that they couldn't make it work for the entirety of their lives. But I still feel like they were close at the end of his life.
Yeah, she's so,
And
by the way, she was in Marlowe.
oh, did you meet her?
No, I didn't personally, but this was during also the COVID period.
I would have gone on a plane and went to that set, man.
Yeah.
You
Well, you
missed
couldn't,
out, Barry.
depending on the situation, you couldn't do it. Like when we shot As They Made Us with Dustin Hoffman, also because of his age, they particularly wouldn't let many people on the set. Like even people who needed to be there, they wouldn't let on.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's it.
yeah, that was a strange period, which is strangely somewhat forgotten already,
Yes.
that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But she's a great actress.
So also let's talk a little bit back to Anne Reinking because I cannot speak highly enough of this woman in this performance. Now she's incredibly beautiful, but I actually think she was a really good actress. And she
Yes.
didn't do that much. She did a few films. She was in Annie and she was in Dudley Moore comedy. I forget the name of that film.
How many young people do you think know who he was?
Not many. I would say not many.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
that's a movie we didn't put on our list. We got to do 10.
Oh, okay.
I love 10. Anyway, Anne Reinking, I could watch her dance all day. I don't even know how she's doing that with her body. It's so sexy and confident. And then a lot of that is Fosse too, choreographing her. But she was amazing. And every time I watch this movie, I appreciate her more and more. And what's interesting is she feels so tall in the movie, but she was only 5'7". So I
Oh,
guess
wow.
most of her was just legs.
Yeah, that's deceptive.
Yeah, so perfectly cast and has
Definitely.
great chemistry with Roy Scheider, I think.
Well, I think it's a great ensemble piece in addition to everything else. I think all the major supporting roles are well cast.
We
and
should
well
also mention
performed.
that Anne Reinking was not just an actress in this movie, she was a Broadway sensation. And she even directed a review on Fosse himself. And I don't know if he was alive at that point or not, but she did a lot of shows. She was a force to be reckoned with on Broadway, and you can see why. She was a pro. Unbelievable. I mean, that's talent for you. And the fact that the talent comes wrapped up in such incredible beauty and intelligence, because
Yes.
when I see her interviewed, she's super smart and very empathetic and so likable. And she died, sadly. She was young. I don't even think she was 70. Was she 70 even? I don't know. She was
71.
71, way too young for somebody to die like that.
Yes.
And just from natural causes. She was just in a hotel room and just didn't wake up. Very sad.
Terrible.
Cliff Gorman is very interesting. He plays a stand-up
The Lenny
comedian
Bruce stand-in,
in
basically.
the fake Lenny movie. But the interesting thing is he actually played Lenny Bruce on stage in Lenny.
Hmm.
And he won the 1972 Tony Award for that performance. So that's how meta this movie is.
Oh, it's definitely
Fosse,
meta.
Fosse is plugging him in to play Lenny in his fake movie or to play the stand-up. And I think it's a little bit of a poking Dustin Hoffman's eye, too. Maybe because Alan Heim, who was talking about how Hoffman didn't appreciate how Lenny was edited, and he thought Fosse and Heim hacked into some of his best performance. So maybe that was a little dig of Fosse saying, I'm going to take the real Lenny Bruce actor, the one who won the Tony Award, I'm going to put him in my movie, and this is who it should have been. I think that's an interesting supposition. And then Cliff Gorman was very interesting. He is in this movie that I love called Night of the Juggler, which we're going to do on this show,
Yes.
and gives a totally maniacal, great performance. And another movie that he's in, which I think we will also talk about, and I love this movie so much. I love this movie as much as All That Jazz. I don't know if as much, but very close. And that's Paul Mazursky's An Unmarried Woman. And he's great in that.
So that's in your top 10 also. Your top 10, which is actually
Yeah,
top
my top 10,
1,000.
which is becoming bulbous. And another reason I know you love Cliff Gorman is because he was Jewish. And his
There you
real name
go.
was Joel Joshua Goldberg.
Well, there are many Jews behind this movie, and Cabaret for that matter.
Alan Heim?
And by the way, you've seen The Boys in the Band.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, he was great in that movie. Oh, by the way, my favorite musical since 1980 is the opening of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
I love that. Yeah, it is absolutely one of my favorite Steven Spielberg scenes. If you had to ask me to name my top 5 Spielberg scenes, that would be on the list.
But it literally is so imaginative. Like it's not just merely well done. It is by almost any standard a great musical number. And it's so well thought out, and even just using different languages and the iconography on display and the colors on display.
Well, don't even get me started on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, because it's my favorite Indiana Jones movie. And I just do not understand the people who hate it. I think even Spielberg has talked down about it and said it was too dark.
I love the original trilogy. It's my favorite film trilogy. We can talk about that maybe another time, a different episode. But the reason I brought up that movie is because I think it's the best, or at least one of the best uses of anything goes in film. But The Boys in the Band also uses it very well in the beginning, in the opening title sequence.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember that. I've seen the movie once.
So, actually, no, I would say that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is my favorite use of anything goes. Sleuth also uses it very well, too. It's a catchy tune.
I'm with you. Leland Palmer, very good as Audrey Gwen Verdon. I'm not that familiar with her other work.
John Lithgow, he's great.
John Lithgow, he plays such a sleazy asshole rival director. I wonder who
he played many roles like that for a while.
Pretty much most of his career.
For most of his career, potentially.
Every Brian De Palma film. Oh, so Lucas Sargent, this fictional rival director, I'm curious who Fosse was modeling that on. It feels too real to not be somebody that he kind of had in mind. I wonder, one would have to do the research on who are the other top Broadway musical directors. There couldn't have been that many.
Yeah, we'd have to investigate that.
Keith Gordon, who went on to become a director, but was in so many of these seminal great movies. The De Palma, he's in Dressed to Kill, he's in this. I'm forgetting some other...
Yeah, actually, there's many De Palma connections.
Home movies. He was in home movies as well for De Palma.
Christine, he's in the John Carpenter movie.
Yeah, he did a lot. he did a lot. And it's interesting for someone like him to have been on the set, and his part is very small and all that jazz, but he got the opportunity to obviously watch Fosse at work, which must have been fascinating, and to watch De Palma and some of these other great directors that he got to work with.
Yes.
And then Sandahl Bergman, who's the lead dancer you see in most of these sequences where Fosse is choreographing the show. We talked about this, and the erotica sequence. Take Off With Us.
Yes.
She went on to do Conan the Barbarian, and she was very beautiful. And she was a real dancer. Again, when Fosse took all these performers from his life, and she was in, I'm not sure the specific shows. I want to say she was in Chicago as well, but I'd have to check that. But that choreography in Take Off With Us sequence is just fantastic. The way these bodies are all folded over on top of each other. And then at the point where they all strip down, and then you see the reactions of the financiers. Like you said, we just lost our family audience.
It reminds me of the scene in A Clockwork Orange where Michael Bates is shocked by the naked woman on stage.
That's right.
And I've always made that mental connection. And by the way, I don't know if it probably was influential. I don't know.
And Fosse was definitely making a point about these financiers, these executives, in terms of, like I said, being a critical look at the film industry filtered through Broadway and the theater world. And the way it chews you up, it spits you out when you no longer have any use or value, or even if you've just had a failure or a critically reviled film. He's calling out the shallow suits of clueless executives.
Oh, and the critic, the clueless woman with the balloons.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
And who else haven't we talked about? Ben Vereen.
He's great.
Yeah, great cameo performance. What is his character's name? O'Connor Flood or something? And he's this variety show host, this glib variety show host, I guess I should add. Yeah, that whole sequence, that whole Bye Bye
Life.
Yeah, what a great sequence.
Which is a parody of Bye Bye Life.
Oh, and in all this talk about Alan Heim, we don't talk about that he's actually the editor of the stand-up that Joe Gideon's editing in the movie. He is the editor.
He is. So that's another meta moment.
Exactly. It's full of meta moments. In fact, when you see the dance performances, like at the cattle call, you know how there's like the principal dancer who's showing them all the dance moves?
Yes.
I think Fosse was involved with her too. Like literally, he had a relationship with her. It seems like he doesn't discard all these women in his life. He keeps them around, or they want to be around him still.
It's interesting that 8.5 was basically describing Bob Fosse's own life in some ways. Or maybe he saw that movie and then he understood his life for the first time. But the difference is the protagonist in 8.5, the director, is a much more passive character, I think.
Yeah.
He's not as interesting, I think, in many ways.
Well, everything is sort of happening to him because he's a guy going through this enormous indecision about what to do next, whereas Fosse absolutely knows what he wants to do. Fosse is very forward momentum, even when he's presented with a song. That
even when he doesn't know what he wants to do, he knows what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Or at least he tries to do something. Yeah, he's just a much more dynamic, active character.
Right. I was just talking about this dancer. I think her name was Jennifer Nairn Smith, the one you see as the principal dancer. The Victoria relationship was based on the relationship Fosse had with her during the making of Pippin. So he's pulling from everything, including the address on the Dexedrine pill bottle that he takes.
So how do you think these women felt about being featured in the movie when it was like an in-joke or something?
I don't think they come off badly in any way or disrespectfully. I think, if anything, Fosse's owning his own mistakes.
No, I'm just curious what, we don't know, of course, but I'm just curious what went through their heads.
I don't know. I mean, I would almost be flattered that he wanted to...
I guess that is what they were, or how they
explore part of this relationship. But he's not, the important thing is he's not humiliating them in these performances. If anything, he's validating them. He's saying, look what these women had to go through. And they still stuck by me.
Yeah.
They still are in my life. Even right now, as I'm making this movie, they're willing to step up for me. And that also speaks to Fosse's character. He clearly was a lovable guy.
Yes. Well, that's for sure.
I read that Fosse's own 16-year-old daughter Nicole Fosse appears briefly as a dancer doing stretches in front of a vending machine when she's asked, would you mind doing this somewhere else, right as Joe Gideon is going to introduce the erotica number. So he's even put his daughter, who he had this kind of challenging relationship with, that even he admits that he clearly was not giving her as much time and attention in his life. And this is what happens with artists who have busy schedules and are doing all this great work in the world, and they don't have a lot of time for family. And a lot of times the children bemoan this when they get older, but then they also admit to being incredibly proud of who their parents were as these landmark artists. And it's a double-edged sword. They didn't get maybe the love and attention they would have desired, but at the same time, they got something else from these parents, and the role model and the idea, if your parents were famous actors and you could, as an adult, when you become your parents' age, you can go back and experience them on screen in a way that you couldn't appreciate when you were a young child. And I think that's a privilege extended only to the children of these famous movie stars or actors, because I can't do that with my parents. And since I was never on screen, my son is never going to be able to do that with me. But I find it fascinating that, for example, Jamie Curtis could go back and see what Tony Curtis was like in his prime. And Jamie Curtis's children, I don't know if she has children, could do that with her or other family members. It is a unique thing because even today, I'll be putting on a movie from like 1945 that I'm only just discovering. And when that movie comes on, it's a new movie. It's not an old movie because it's any movie that I haven't seen yet is a new movie.
That's right.
So it must be hugely fascinating to get to know your parents, especially prolific actors, because you don't just get to see them in their 20s. You get to see them in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s. I mean, it must be insane to be able to go and relive the entire filmography of your parents' life. Because I know also the children, when they're younger, they take it for granted.
Yeah, which makes sense to a certain degree.
My son, there are movies I've made my son hasn't seen, and he could care less about seeing. I mean, when it's your parents, it's not special.
Your son hasn't seen all your movies?
Not all of it.
Which ones has he seen?
I think he's seen Running Scared and The Cooler. Did he see Pawn Shop Chronicles? He might have seen that one. He hasn't seen Crossing Over, that's for sure. I know that.
How do you know that?
Because I've asked him and I've said,
okay.
Hey. And also,
well, wait a minute. See, that's a curious question. Oh, go on. Actually, first, then I'll ask my question.
Well, he's got a little cameo in Crossing Over too, which when he was, I want to say he's like 7 or something in it. He's in a classroom scene. So we've always got that moment on film of his.
But you just said he didn't see that movie.
I know he hasn't seen it, but he's
not even curious to see his cameo?
He's seen that moment of it, but he hasn't seen the movie.
Oh, okay. But so because my other question relates to what you brought up is there a reason, for example, that you never got around to showing him all the movies, or when you did show him the movies that he did see, how did that come about?
Well, I don't think he was that interested in seeing them. And then I think he started hearing about them or reading about them, or some friend at school had seen one of them or something. And then he said, well, I think I need to see it. And I didn't need to show him Running Scared at a very young age because it's a pretty transgressive movie.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
I felt like I needed him to say, hey, I'm ready to see it. And the
Or let me ask you this question. Oh, go on, finish.
No, it was the same thing with The Cooler. I think he just got older and he got curious. But believe me, my work is the least intriguing work to him because it's his father. And that's just the way it is.
But in general, did you show him a lot of movies?
Oh, yeah. I showed him everything that he wasn't supposed to see because I knew that he would really value this when he got older. And I also knew that I wasn't going to have a lot of time with him because the time goes so fast. So let's assume by the time, well, not assume, at 13 years old, you kind of still got him at home and you can show him films. I was showing him the De Palma movies. I showed him a lot. I showed him tons of R-rated movies. But I knew by the time he was 15, 16, he wouldn't want to spend any time with me. He would be off with his friends already. And that was true. So by the time he was 15, 16, he was already lost to his friends. And then occasionally I could say, hey, come see this movie, or on my birthday or something, he would say, oh, let's watch a movie, Dad. So pretty much I had between the time he was about 10 to 14 maybe to show him everything that I wanted to show him, which he's so grateful he's seen now because he's got all this film education and film vocabulary that he wouldn't have had. He had a lot of friends whose parents didn't even want to show them PG-13 movies. And a funny thing, I meant to talk about this on the Scarface podcast, but my wife was never happy with this. She said, "Why are you showing these movies? I don't approve of it." And I said, "Because I saw them when I was that age, and I turned out just fine. And most of these movies, there's nothing wrong with it." I was not showing him anything pornographic, that's for sure. But the one movie she said you cannot show him was Scarface. She said, "I'm drawing the line at Scarface. I have to have at least something where you will respect my wishes and not show him this movie." And of course, because he knew that, he bugged me every day of his life to see Scarface. So finally, one day when my wife wasn't home, and I don't know where she was, I said, "Okay, I'm going to show you Scarface, but you cannot tell your mom you ever saw this movie." So Scarface he's a Clockwork Orange, equivalent of me getting a Clockwork Orange. So we saw it. Of course, he loved it. And we didn't tell her till years later when he may have even been 18, 19, something like that. And she was so furious.
But it is so
that was a Joe Gideon move on my part.
I see. Yeah, maybe you copied the move from him. But what was I going to say? No, because I've asked other directors what their experience has been like showing their movies to their children, or if they ever have. And I'm often surprised by how few of them have shown their kids their movies. It seems to be more often that way than the opposite, which to me would not be the case. But it's also strange because my parents are not in the arts, and they were constantly showing me movies. So in that respect, it just goes to show you everybody's different, right? Like literally.
Well, children don't see their parents when their parents are movie stars or filmmakers in the same way that the public does. They're sick of you, and they don't think you're anything special. So the fact that you made a movie or a few movies or you starred in movies and everybody thinks you hot shit is all the more reason for kids to go, I live with this. I don't need to see it.
That's a fascinating situation. Like, I think they should make a movie about that. They probably did. I can't think of one off the top of my head, though. Certainly not one that goes into depth about it.
Can you imagine, let's say, Christian Bale's kids at school going, "My dad's Batman." And they're going like, "What the fuck? Everybody's dad's Batman. How can your dad be Batman?" It's living with that kind of thing for kids
But I also think that's correct. But I find that fascinating, by the way. But I also think it's interesting because I think certain individuals are cinephiles and some aren't, right? So in other words, if you are a cinephile for whatever reason, whether your parents are filmmakers or not, you're going to be more obsessed with seeing as many movies as possible. You see what I'm saying? In other words,
well, my son, while being a painter and an artist, he's not involved in film. He is a cinephile.
Okay.
You can talk to him about any film and he'll know.
Well, like I said, every individual is going to be their own person at the end of the day.
He loves coming home. He lives in New York, and he loves coming home at the end of the year. And because I get all the screeners through BAFTA, he loves watching them all. He's like, "What's good? What should I watch?" And then he'll watch them. Sometimes he'll watch them with me, but for the most part, he watches them. And I love this. You'll love this about him. We share a credit card. And then I notice on my credit card statement that I'm paying for the Criterion channel. And I'm like, I said, "Ethan, did you subscribe to the Criterion channel?" And he goes, yeah, I did. I said, "Then why didn't you share the fucking password with me?" He was like, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll give it to you." So his interests are definitely within the Criterion channel. He loves art and he loves artistic movies, and he gets all these deep, great films, and he's seen so many of them. And there's a lot more I wish I could show him. When he comes back to town, he's spending time with a girlfriend or his friends. I have very little time with him, but we'd probably find time to watch one or two movies. But I could spend weeks just showing movies that I think he should see. There's no shortage of them. I mean, I doubt he'll even listen to this podcast because your dad is just... Honestly, it's your dad isn't anything special to you. Now, if there was, if his friend's dad was David Fincher, he would be all up that.
Yeah, it's just so, subjectivity reigns supreme.
I don't take any of it personally at all. I just don't. It's like, if you want to spend time with me and watch movies, great. I mean, it's so funny. Sometimes he'll come to me, I'll be dead tired, and he'll say, "Hey, Dad, let's watch a movie." But because I want to spend time with him, okay, let's go watch a movie. I'll throw back a Red Bull And then we'll be 5 minutes into the movie and he'll go, oh, I'm too tired. So, so, so he bails and I've got this Red Bull in me and I'm up and it's like, fuck it. Okay. I'm watching a movie.
Yeah, well, but it just goes to show you that subjectivity reigns supreme, right? Every individual has different movie watching habits or reading habits or, fill in the blank art form. It's just that's a fascinating, someone should make a documentary if they haven't already on that phenomenon, how different people experience works of art differently.
To get back to all that jazz, I definitely have to call out Giuseppe Rotuno, the cinematographer, who I think
Great.
does a
Yeah, he's a great
fantastic job.
cinematographer in general.
So let's talk about the production design of All That Jazz by Philip Rosenberg, who won an Oscar for it. Now, you contend that Alien should have won that year, and Alien is fantastic. But I also think what Rosenberg does in this movie is amazing with those hospital studio sets and the way the stage goes up and even the rehearsal spaces. Like if you look at also the on Broadway sequence from the opening of the movie, that backdrop against the stage, I know this sounds weird, but it reminds me of Alien. It feels like it could be part of the alien ship at one point, the
No, it does look a bit like
communal
that.
area kind of thing. But I think sometimes we tend to want to throw the design awards at the most obvious choices because clearly Alien had incredible production design.
Well, it's
But
sui
the
generis.
production designer of Alien was not Geiger, right? Geiger just he designed the alien and then they took the alien bone structure at the production designer and
But he did drawings of the spaceship, the alien spaceship that they then had to find a way to build. So I still give him credit, whether he formally received credit or not, it doesn't really matter. He
no, I'm
he was
saying the
a
Geiger parts were the best parts of it. But Geiger wasn't credited as the production designer on Alien. Michael Seymour was the production designer on Alien. But all anybody remembers about Alien is the Geiger design of the alien itself and the sexual, organic kind of walls and the vaginal areas and the phallic piping and
and
all
the
of that of
skeletal
Alien.
stuff.
So the question, and I don't know the answers about that with Alien, is was it Michael Seymour's decision to find Geiger, or did he find Geiger and say, I think it should be this, or did Ridley Scott do that? Now, either way, it's an incredibly designed movie. Alien is in my ever-growing top 10, that's for sure. But how much of that
It's one of
was
my
Michael
absolute favorites also. And
yeah,
the
how
second
much
one,
of that
yeah.
was Michael Seymour? How much of that was Geiger? And I don't know why Geiger wasn't given a co-production design on
He
that
won at
movie.
least for visual effects. Maybe that's why they didn't give it the other award too, because maybe the voters were confused about who did what. But regardless of,
But bringing it back to All That Jazz, we tend to discredit films that exist in the familiar and the real in terms of production design. So, like Bob Fosse's rehearsal studio or his apartment, with the staircase that Anne Reinking and the Michelle Daughter character come
well,
doing the
they did a
dance
great
down.
job, there's no question, designing the sets of all that
The
jazz. But I'm
the,
just
ho-
saying,
the hospital. I mean, there is a lot in there because he combines the familiar sets that you'd expect for what a studio looks like or a hospital, but then he brings in the surreal aspects of it, and
correct.
those are pretty amazing.
And if Alien hadn't come out that year, then maybe I would have given the award to all
It
that
would be a
jazz.
very
But
it'd be a very hard call for me to make, and I probably would side with you on Alien, but what I'm saying is don't diminish
oh, I'm not
what
diminishing
a
it.
challenge All That Jazz was.
No, I still think they did an excellent job. I just think if you see those two movies side by side and you're trying to evaluate which one has superior design elements when it comes to production design and art direction, I would say, I'm just speaking for me personally, it's Alien. I mean, Alien is one of the most originally designed movies of all time, I think.
I think the credit is seems more. I hate to say this in terms of the auteur theory, but it seems more likely it's Ridley Scott because when you look at two of the most amazingly designed films of all time, it's Alien and Blade Runner in terms of how influential they both are.
Well, he also deserves some credit too, of course.
But the same designers didn't work on the same movies.
No, but they also do look different as well. Like
But what
obviously
I'm
the
saying is they're both have unique visionary production design, and I'm not saying you couldn't get two different production designers to give you that,
Yes.
but it seems to me the Ridley Scott imprint on both these films, because Scott himself was an artist and
Well, by the way, I would have nominated Ridley Scott that year for Best Director. Actually, my choice for Best Picture of 1979, even though it wasn't nominated, is Alien, and he would have won Best Director.
and remember, Apocalypse Now was up too.
That's right. But my
And that
my favorite movie of 1979 is Alien.
what a year for movies that we're squabbling over whether it was Alien or all that
Oh no,
jazz
yeah,
or
there's many,
Apocalypse
many
Now or
masterpieces.
Kramer versus Kramer. I mean, my God, we would be lucky to get one of these in any year we're living in right now. But when I see all that jazz winning it for production design, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I do wish Alien could have been honored too, but I don't have a problem with it because I think the production design and all that jazz is phenomenal.
No, it is great. And Moonraker, by the way, which was also that year, has great production design by Ken Adam. He wasn't even nominated. I don't understand that.
That's insane because that
It is
is my
insane.
favorite Ken Adam James Bond set. I know you love the Volcano set from You Only Live Twice.
I love
but
every set he ever did.
Yeah, I love the Moonraker space station. I think it's so brilliant.
Okay, so that doesn't make any sense. I mean, first, so my order would have been Alien #1 for production design, then Moonraker, and Moonraker wasn't even nominated.
What about Apocalypse Now? You don't think that had incredible production design?
That's also great.
But I don't think you can leave all that jazz out of the production design nominations.
No, I wouldn't. I would have given it a nomination. I'm just saying if I had to pick one. By the way, I can also give ties. I'm flexible like that. And I'm actually notorious for my long ties. But I'm saying if I had to pick a single favorite movie in that category, it would be Alien. And it would be Alien almost any year for that matter, because there's almost no set that is more original than the alien ship with the space jockey in it. I think that's one of the most original sets ever designed and executed.
And Ralph Burns won an Oscar for the best music original song score, something they don't have anymore, which is a very strange category.
Strange.
I think you get nominated if you are creating an original score within a musical, is my understanding of it. So he did some adaptation of some of the more well-known songs, but he also did original score within that. And the original score he does within that is very good, too.
It is great.
You hear it when Scheider is floating toward Jessica Lange in the end.
Yes.
It's that kind of Broadway-ish resolved theme. And Ralph Burns was a very good composer.
But here again is, in my opinion, a ludicrous result because my favorite score of 1979 is Jerry Goldsmith's for Alien, and he wasn't even nominated for ludicrous reasons.
Well, I'll tell you something about that. First of all, you're talking about different categories because...
No, I know, but I mean, the fact that he wasn't nominated for music at all.
But I'll tell you also why he may not have been nominated is because Ridley Scott chopped up Jerry Goldsmith's score.
I know he did.
And put in pieces from Freud and all other kinds of things.
But that's still silly because there's plenty of original music that was used. And by the way, the music that they borrowed from other movies is excellently used in Alien, so I can't complain myself. Basically, due to bureaucratic rules and maybe other considerations, he didn't get a nomination, and I think he should have won. Like, if there had been only one Oscar that year for music and no fancy additional categories, I would have given it to Jerry Goldsmith for Alien. I think it's a very inventive score, coming up with all kinds of ambient alien sounds, but also it has interesting melodies floating around. It's just a great post-Stravinskian masterpiece.
Well, it was a travesty that Jerry Goldsmith won only one Oscar for his entire amazing career, and that was for
it's also he should have won for many other movies. And by the way, Elmer Bernstein also only won once, which is ludicrous. Bernard Herrmann only once. It's ridiculous. And today you'll get these composers that I have no interest in whatsoever, and they get 12 Oscars. Not literally 12, but they get many.
Stanley Kubrick never won an Oscar, and Brian De Palma has never received a nomination, so the whole thing is bullshit. I mean, if we look to the Oscars for any kind of justice or validation of great artists, you're going to be seriously lacking. I mean, most of my favorite films of all time never won Best Picture.
And you can say the same about every awards organization, including the Nobel Committee.
I mean, occasionally they get it right, but
it's all subjective.
And by the way, Jerry was nominated that year for
Star Trek.
And he should have won for that score because that score is a fucking insanely brilliant
I
score.
prefer Alien, but it is a masterpiece.
Yeah, which one do I prefer of those? I don't know. I think they're both great. I mean, obviously Alien is more atonal score, and Star Trek
it's just so alien. It lives up to... Alien's score lives up to the title.
I will tell you that the score that did win that year, Georges Delerue,'s A Little Romance, is not a score I would have picked at all. And
So
I
there you
love
go.
Delarue's music, but I think that's, in my opinion, one of his weaker scores. Then Layla Schifrin was nominated for the Amityville Horror, which is kind of like an Exorcist ripoff score. And I loved Schifrin. I think he was a great composer, but I don't think that's his greatest score. Dave Grusin for The Champ. I really don't remember that movie, so I don't remember the score that much.
But Jerry Goldsmith was nominated for a Golden Globe, so their considerations were obviously different, right? Their rules
They
were
probably
different.
didn't know enough, or they had different, yeah, like you said, different consideration. For example, Nino Rota, I don't think they allowed him to be nominated for the first Godfather because he used a theme that from an earlier film of his for one of the themes of The Godfather, and that disqualified him. But if
That's
I'm not
silly.
mistaken, he got nominated for Godfather 2.
He
And
won
he won for Godfather
with
2.
Carmine, the father of
So
Francis.
that makes no sense at all because all the
No.
same themes from the original Godfather are in Godfather
And it
2.
wasn't nominated ludicrously for best cinematography. Neither was the first.
Unbelievable. And the
And
Godfather
the
should have
second
won.
Godfather, yes, and the second Godfather wasn't nominated for best editing, which makes no sense.
We're going to turn ourselves in circles here trying to find any kind of justice coming out of the choices of the Academy voters and their gardeners and housekeepers. I mean, how does Chinatown not win Best Picture? How does Jack Nicholson not win Best Actor for playing Jake
Well, The
Gideon?
Godfather Part 2 won, so it wasn't a terrible result.
Yeah, but Godfather Part 1 already fucking won. At least give it to
And it didn't,
Chinatown.
yeah, and also have you ever noticed how on the relatively rare occasions, especially in the 20th century, when a movie that won Best Picture didn't win Best Director, it was often a movie that really did deserve to also win Best Director? Like, it's so weird how that works, right? It's like the only Best Picture winner of the 1970s that didn't win Best Director was The Godfather. Now, guess who won Best Director
Two.
instead?
Yeah.
Bob Fosse. And by the way, I think he did deserve it. I think Francis Ford Coppola and I think Joseph L. Mankiewicz for Sleuth also were deserving. Any one of those would have been a worthy
I
winner.
like Cabaret, and of course, I'm a huge fan of Bob Fosse, but The Godfather was a better movie than Cabaret. I just contend that it was. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, so my point is though, and certainly that's the consensus opinion. So the thing is, from that standpoint, it's ludicrous that The Godfather didn't win Best Director, right?
It is
It's
ludicrous.
yeah.
And Godfather 2, I'm not putting it down. I prefer Godfather 2 to 1. I think it's a masterpiece.
If
I
I
think
had to
it's
pick,
stone
I
cold
also
masterpiece.
prefer the second.
So maybe they got it right the second time, although The Godfather, I mean, how can they get it? I mean, yeah, it won Best Picture, so what are we crying over it for? I'm crying for all that jazz that should have won Best Picture, and Roy Scheider should have won Best Actor. But it got 4 Oscars. That's a lot. And some of those were great categories like editing and production
Yes.
design.
Although I would have given the editing Oscar to Alien.
No way, no way. You're blowing my gaskets now. Did you just watch all that jazz again? The editing on all
Yeah, but
that
I've
jazz.
watched Alien.
I've seen Alien a million times.
Yeah,
There is
exactly.
no way the editing on Alien, which is great, believe me,
It is great.
it's no slouch in the editing
It's
department. But all that
immaculate.
jazz may well be the best edited movie I've ever seen in
But
my
wait a
life.
minute, even the sequence when Tom Skerritt's character, Captain Dallas, is in the ventilation shaft, just that sequence alone is
Yes,
masterfully
it's an
edited.
amazing job of editing, and I'll contend that the chest burster scene is as well edited as
Yeah.
anything that's ever been put on screen.
So there you go.
I'm not saying Alien isn't well edited. I'm just saying the innovation in the editing of all that jazz and the rhythm of the film is you really see what the editor is bringing to Bob Fosse's footage. He shot a lot of great footage, but another editor who didn't have those amazing ideas and the
Yeah.
sensibility and the rhythm, it would not be the same movie.
Oh, for sure.
And Robert Alan Arthur, he was the producer and co-screen wrote it with Bob Fosse. And I don't know how much of the final draft of the script was Robert Alan Arthur's, because I think they started out with a very different script that was based on a book about a woman dying that Fosse really liked, but thought it was too depressing. And then I believe it was, who was the sports writer? Was it Jimmy
Well,
Breslin?
that's why that theme is all throughout the movie, right? The stages of dying.
Yeah, that's probably from the book. I wouldn't be surprised if
Yeah.
that's from the book, even though the book is not credited. But I think it was Jimmy Breslin, who was a friend of Fosse's, read a draft of that script and said to him, why don't you do it as a choreographer and put in songs and dances and make it more enjoyable? And Fosse really took that to heart, and that's how it became All That Jazz. And I'm curious whether at that point, whether Robert Allen Arthur had anything to do with the writing moving forward. But he was also the producer and sadly died fairly soon after production, or at least before the Academy Awards ceremony. So he was honored posthumously with the nominations.
That's true. And by the way, you might want to edit this out, but I just have to bring this up because it's fascinating. These were the nominees for Best Editing of 1979. Kramer versus Kramer. How the hell did that get an editing nomination but not Alien? Alien didn't even get nominated for editing.
Well, you know, that they said up until, and I think it may even still count to some degree, that you can't win Best Picture if you don't get the editing nomination.
And The Godfather Part 2 wasn't even nominated for Best Editing, and it won Best Picture, which makes no sense based on what you just said and many other
And especially because
reasons.
The Godfather 2 has got this amazing cross-editing happening.
Yeah. No, the whole thing is ludicrous. But I'm just saying, look at just the nominees for 1979. Why would Kramer versus Kramer be more worthy of an editing nomination
Well,
than...
I haven't seen the movie in a long, long time, and
the answer is it's not worthy of it.
Well, I'm going to say to you, just because, and this was about production design as well, just because a movie on the surface doesn't look like it's got complicated or dazzling editing or production design or costumes doesn't mean it isn't worthy. It just means it's doing its job so damn well, it isn't calling attention to it in the same way as period costume and postmodern style editing and horror fantasy production design. I don't think you should look down on a movie for doing that. And I do want to watch that movie again. But it's probably really seamlessly edited. All movies, the editing in movies is essential, and it's the last rewrite on any film. Actually, the last rewrite is the projectionist, if he keeps it in focus. But
or how about The Rose? Did you see The Rose?
A long time ago again.
So how did that get an editing nomination over Alien? I mean, again, I know what you just said, but again, it's...
Well, I guess The Rose had all these musical performances and again, like All That Jazz, it felt more dynamic in those scenes. What else was nominated?
The Black Stallion.
Yeah, I don't even know if I have.
And Apocalypse Now. So Apocalypse Now makes the most sense.
Apocalypse Now. I'm stunned how little Apocalypse Now features into any of these prominent awards or any of these wins, because Apocalypse Now, I will venture to say, out of all these movies we've discussed, Apocalypse Now is the movie that's most revered of all these movies today.
It is.
Well, Apocalypse Now is a masterpiece. I don't know if I have it in my ever-expanding top 10, but I think it's an incredible movie. It's a 10 out of 10. Every aspect of it, what Coppola went through to do it, the scale of it, the tone of it, it's such a strange movie. It's such a...
By the way, it's a Conradian movie, and Alien is also. So it's interesting that they both came out the same year.
Yeah. Was Apocalypse Now? I have to believe it was nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, right?
It was.
It's unbelievable the amount of powerhouse movies that audiences got served up in those days. And
they're all different.
And they didn't even know it. They didn't realize. Right. I bet you they complained about movies as much as we did. Oh, there's nothing in the theater today. But when you look at what we're faced with today, which is there is literally nothing adult drama, complicated, complex, transgressive. There's nothing on the screen like that anymore. Nothing.
And look at how
audiences got like 20, 30 a year of these.
Correct. And look at how each of these, we're just talking now about 1979, but we've done this in other episodes where we've taken a given year and listed how many great movies came out that year. So in 1979, we've made already a list of how many great movies came out. And we didn't even go through all of them, right? We didn't make
not even the ones that we loved that weren't nominated.
Correct. So what I'm saying is, look at how each one of these great movies is totally different from all the others.
And
right? Alien is totally different, when you compare it to All That Jazz.
And made with scale and the bells and whistles that they only afford Marvel films and big sci-fi or IP sequels today. These movies were originals. I guarantee you, if you took the exact same budget of All That Jazz, of all those same elements, including the shooting schedule and the equipment used and what they paid actors, and transposed it onto today's film industry in terms of how they price things, All That Jazz would be $100 million movie with I have to believe All That Jazz shot for 90 days, minimum 90 days. And Reinking was talking about how just the sequence where they sing Everything Old is New Again shot for 7 days.
Wow.
Now, if I was making All That Jazz and I had that, at best, they'd give me 2 days. I'd have to fight for the second day. So that's how Fosse got every fucking angle under the sun to cover that, and it looks amazing. But we're in a different world today.
Would you say that Babylon, the Damien Chazelle movie, is in the tradition of All That Jazz, relatively speaking? I mean, you could also say it's in the tradition of Sunset Boulevard or 8.5, but
I mean, I don't know, because
it's
honestly,
trying to be. I didn't say
movie. I don't want to knock another filmmaker, but that movie just isn't even in the same class.
Oh, I agree, but I'm not
movies.
asking. Yeah, no, of course, but I'm not asking whether it's a good movie or a bad movie. I'm just saying it strikes me as a movie that's attempting to be in the tradition of a movie like All That Jazz or 8.5 or Sunset Boulevard, right? A meta artistic movie about
Yeah, I guess.
visionary or wannabe visionary. It has parallels, but I agree it's nowhere near in the same league.
Well, it's not as hallucinatory at all like some of these films we're talking about, or
And I don't think it works well either.
phantasmagoria like.
Yeah.
I think it maybe is trying in places to get there, but it just doesn't have it in its DNA. I would say La La Land might be more
Yes, it's also
on that
yeah.
level of that kind of film, or Whiplash, which I thought was a fantastic movie. I think Whiplash feels more like All That Jazz than anything else he's made.
Yes. And by the way, I'm not commenting on whether they're
No, we
good
don't
movies
need.
or bad
Yeah,
movies. I'm just saying that
I know
those
what you're
movies,
saying.
yeah.
In terms of what it's trying to say and the scale of it. But even Babylon, I don't think had the same budget as All That Jazz if you transposed it over to what is today. I mean, Babylon, I think, had only like 50 or 60 shooting days. I'd be very curious to know what Fosse's shooting schedule was on All That Jazz, because in those days, your typical adult drama that was made and released by a studio, they were 75 to 90-day shooting schedules. And even in the 90s with the Julia Roberts romantic comedies, those movies shot for 50, 60 days, or the Robert Redford dramas. This idea of whittling everything down to 25-day schedules, and anything that's got an indie dramatic or perceived as a non-commercial voice becomes this $3 to $5 million indie. You can't compete. It can't compete with the scale and vision of what films were allowed to be in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
That's right.
There's been a fucking holocaust that's happened to our industry in terms of resources that are afforded to quality, interesting, complex movies, and the dumbing down of the audience. And I don't think it's controversial to say that, although it may be in the executive chambers of these studios. It's just a hunt for money and the lowest common denominator. And a movie like All That Jazz would get no oxygen in this world. And all I can say is, as I say on most of these episodes, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad I get to relive it whenever I want at home, and can still enjoy the pleasures of a movie like this, even though movies like this aren't getting made anymore.
I think that people should also seek out Star 80 because in many ways it's a companion piece to this movie because it shows you the even darker side of the entertainment industry and the media and showbiz and
we'll
all that
do an
other
episode
stuff.
on Star 80 for sure, because it's an excellent film. And it's definitely a film that wouldn't be made again. And it's
No.
definitely a film that wouldn't be made in the way Fosse made it. So that's it for this podcast. And we'll be back with another Forbidden Films podcast very soon.
Damn right.